The Andals originated in the lands of the Axe, although some say they came from south of the Silver Sea, a great inland sea in northern Essos that has been reduced to three large lakes in the grasslands. And during their travels they carved out Andalos. They brought iron weapons with them and suits of iron plates, against which the tribes that inhabited those lands could do little. Eventually, Andals conquered those lands, exterminating a race of hairy men who were believed to be cousins to the Ibanese. Holy texts teach that the Andals learned iron forging from the Smith of the Seven, but since the Rhoynar were already an advanced civilization at that time and they too knew of iron and lived in proximity, the theory of divine interfering becomes less believable, especially if known that Rhoynish outposts were found in Andalos, and the Andals were not the first who learned iron forging from Rhoynar. Whatever the truth about iron forging, it does not change fact that Andals did live in those areas for many centuries, untroubled, till their culture developed all of its formative features, to the time that Hugor of the Hill, according to legend and religious belief, was visited by the Seven. In the oldest of the holy books, the Seven-Pointed Star, it is said that Hugor received a vision of a god manifesting to him as seven robed figures. Hugor was supposedly crowned by the father himself, who pulled down 7 stars to make his crown. The maid brought forth a girl, supple as a willow, with eyes like deep blue pools, that Hugor took as his first wife. The mother made her fertile, and she bore him 44 mighty sons, as foretold by the crone. The warrior gave each son strength of arms, and the smith brought each a suit of iron plate. Thus Andals gained new gods, and these gods had their features. After all, it is easier to kill in the name of a gods who represent yourself, isn't it? And Andals were truly cruel and zealous in following their new gods, to the point of exterminating all non-believers. An old legend told in Pentos claims that the Andals slew the swan maidens who lured travelers to their deaths in the Velvet Hills that lie to the east of the Free City. A hero whom the Pentoshi singers call Hugor led the Andals at that time. Hugor may well be a rendering of the name of Hugor, as you can notice. It may be considered that Hugor was a true hero, killing the murderous swan maidens. But in the same song it is said that he slew the 7 maids not for their crimes, but instead as sacrifice to his gods. This notion makes one reconsider the true motives of the faith of the 7. It is also said in the Seven-Pointed Star that the 7 promised Hugor and his descendants great kingdoms in a foreign land, and that is said to be the reason for Andals to conquer Westeros. But there may have been a better reason for Andals to leave their lands. Since with the fall of Old Gis, dragonlords of Freehold of Valyria started to expand their domains and sought more slaves. At first the Rhoyne and the Rhoynar served as a buffer between Andals and the dragonlords. Undoubtedly, Andals might have fought against Valyrian tides at first, and the Rhoynar might even have aided them, but Valyrians were unstoppable in their urge, so it is most likely the Andals chose to flee rather than face the inevitable slavery that came with Valyrian conquest. The fate of Andal King Carlan the Great may have been a great warning for the rest of the Andals. After 20 years of warfare against petty kings of Andalos, Carlan's domains stretched as far as the headwaters of the Upper Rhoyne and the Noyne, and that eventually led to conflict with other Andal kings and the free city of Norvos. When the Norvoshi closed the Noyne, Carlan defeated them twice in the hills of Norvos. Unwisely, however, he then marched against the city of Norvos. The Norvoshi sent to Valyria for help, and the Freehold rose in defense of its colony. 100 dragonlords burned Carlan the Great and his Andal host outside Norvos. The dragonlords then attacked the Lorati Isles, burning Carlan's keep. It is said nobody survived the scouring of Lorath. Fall of their mightiest king thus proved that strength of the Andals, their concept of chivalry and iron-wrought armor were nothing compared with the dragons. That event may have spurred Andals to retreat to the Axe, the lands from which they had sprung, and when that did not protect them, they retreated farther north and west until they came to the sea. Some might have given up there and surrendered to their fate, but many and more made ships and sailed in great numbers across the narrow sea to the lands of the first men in Westeros. Since Andal conquest of Westeros was split in separate great tides, it is likely that Andals were holding defense in Essos till their last stand, leaving the coast of the Axe and the Lorati Islands in great numbers, tide after tide. Unfortunately, it is not even known when the Andals sailed west across the narrow sea for the first time, with some sources dating the Andal invasion to 6,000 years ago, and some claiming it occurred 4,000 years ago, and then again others say it happened only 2,000 years ago. Whatever the truth, Valyrians claimed Andal lands to themselves through time, and established Myr in place of a walled Andal town, and many of the Valyrian colonists of Pentos intermarried with local Andals. The Valyrians had denied the Andals the promise of the Seven on Essos, somehow forgetting own religious tolerance. Many think that the faith of the Seven was considered by Valyrians dangerous because of the strict denial of incestuous relationships, which were in the core of Valyrian culture, especially valued by dragon lords, who were able to sustain own power over dragons only by keeping the bloodline pure. However, most Andals escaped the fate of slavery and assimilation, and became even more zealous after the conflict with superior enemy and the flight from the demon-like winged fire-breathing creatures with abominations atop them. So the warriors of the Andals carved a seven-pointed star upon their bodies, and swore by their blood and the Seven not to rest until they carved their own kingdoms in the Sunset Lands. Their success gave Westeros a new name, Araish Andali, the land of the Andals, as the Dothraki now name it. Andals first landed on the fingers in the Vale of Arryn. Carvings of the seven-pointed star and axe are scattered upon the rocks and stones throughout the Vale, a practice that eventually fell out of use as the Andal conquest progressed. Sweeping through the Vale with fire and sword, the Andals began their conquest of Westeros. Eventually, some of the first men submitted, though in many cases the Andals took the wives and daughters of the defeated kings to wife, as a means of solidifying their right to rule. For, despite everything, the first men were far more numerous than the Andals, and could not simply be forced aside. The fact that many Southron castles still have godswoods with carved weirwoods at their hearts is said to be thanks to the Andal kings, who shifted from conquest to consolidation, thus avoiding any conflict based on differing faiths. Yet still, wars were fought throughout the decades, and the Andals won because of their knowledge of iron forging, since first men at those times still used the bronze weapons. Of course, advanced weapons were not the only thing that made Andals to succeed in their conquest. Those were wits and backstabs that had won them the lands for the most part. Andals made first-man kings fight each other, thus weakening them, using their old grudges for own advantage. When the Vale was secured, the Andals turned their attention to the rest of Westeros and poured forth through the Bloody Gate. In the wars that followed, Andal adventurers carved out small kingdoms from the old realms of the First Men, and fought one another as often as they fought the First Men. Eventually, all the Southern kingdoms fell. As with the Valemen, some submitted to the Andals, even taking up the faith of the Seven. Stormlands, Reach, Dorne, and Westerlands fell to the iron grip of the Andals through time. Even the Ironborn fell to the wave of Andal conquest eventually. It was the North alone that was able to keep the Andals at bay, thanks to the impenetrable swamps of the Neck and the ancient keep of Moat Cailin. Andals proved to be great schemers, killers, and rulers, all in the name of their faith. But when the Dragon Lords came once more, and they did not have a place where to run, what happened then? Of what worth is the faith if its main principles are being forgotten for the sake of survival? And then the dragons disappeared, and now they are back, and both would-be queens can be accused of incestuous relationships. Where is the faith now? Thank you for watching. See ya.